Donald Trump is now officially the GOP candidate for president, and Nikki Haley has at last bowed out, taking home less than 1/10 of the number of delegates that Trump did. Now, we told you over a year ago that barring any black swan events, Trump would undoubtedly win. But why? Well, it's because we ask Americans what they think, and Americans told us that they want Trump. But most other people just seem to be waking up to that fact. Here's a pretty stunning clip from CNN last night.
And so what you have here is, he has remade the party in his image. There are still some Republicans who are trying to take it away, like take it back. That's over. That's over. There's no back. That party doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It just doesn't. It just doesn't. Look at the House of Representatives. Look at what's happening in the United States Senate. Mitch McConnell stepping aside. And some of the more governing conservatives trying to keep their power even just within the Senate Republican conference. This is a new Republican Party. And so you have a very formidable Republican frontrunner who has remade the party in his image. And I know a lot of people at home are asking, well, wait a minute. We all saw January 6th. Wait a minute. Innocent till proven guilty, but there's all these cases. He has convinced them he won the last election. Never mind anything that happened since then. A majority of these voters are going to the polls in most of these states still saying that Donald Trump should be president. Yeah. And so this is his party.
It isn't just mainstream media pundits who are waking up to Trump's impact on the Republican Party. Mostly establishment candidates have spent probably close to $500 million trying to challenge Trump. But let's take time to turn back the clock and highlight all of the reasons that those people should have known that Trump was going to come out on top. Let's call it establishment myth-busting. And how about for the very first one, let's take a look at the fact that Trump is a criminal. This one should be pretty easy to do. Now, there's always been a cloud of legal persecution over Trump, and it never really seemed to affect him much. Outside of the first fall of his term, that is. When Russiagate was at its peak, his approval dove into the high 30s. But after that, his approval rebounded, and despite those two impeachments, Russiagate, and all that, his job approval stayed roughly in a 48 to 50% range for the last 3 years of his term. For comparison, Joe Biden's job approval is 40% today. Now, it's tough to pinpoint any huge swing in public opinion to refute the fact that Trump being a criminal had an impact. But basically, Republican voters have been ambivalent at best to any of the criminal developments. His favorability was never really affected, and by the time the court cases started, he had already earned his massive primary lead. Here's August 2022, right after the Mar-a-Lago raid, which basically just saw the FBI lose its positive favorability for the first time ever, and a majority of voters, plus 76% of Republicans, agreed that the FBI was being used as Joe Biden's personal Gestapo. A year later, just before Trump's famous mugshot, only 18% of Trump's 2020 voters said that the Georgia indictment would hurt his chances of becoming president, while 39% said it would help him, and 74% together said it would help him or make no difference. I think the high-level conclusion is that if 2 impeachments and a special counsel aren't going to take Trump down, then a couple of egregiously weaponized court cases aren't going to do it either, especially when the current sitting president seems to have equivalent problems of his own. Now let's get into the second one, that Trump is an insurrectionist. That should hurt his chances to be the candidate for presidency, right? It doesn't look like it affected him at all. The week after the Capitol riot, Trump finished his term with an approval rating of 48%. His last monthly approval rating among Republicans was 81%, which is 10 points higher than Biden's is today among Democrats. And 6 months after the Capitol riot, Trump had a 52% approval rating among all voters and 84% among Republicans. His approval went up after January 6 among Republicans. And a year after Jan 6, the Republican approval rating was 85% and still 52% among all voters. The fact is, time after time, from a favorability perspective, Trump has outperformed every public official we've tested. Schumer, McConnell, McCarthy, Pelosi, Jeffries, Pence, Haley. But that brings us to one person, DeSantis, and the next myth. Trump's mean tweets. That's gotta keep him out of office, right? It is true that DeSantis is the one person who outscored Trump in Republican and overall favorability. And that's when Trump had the biggest political damage. Far worse than losing 2020 or Jan 6 or any impeachment for that matter. It was the perceived Republican underperformance of the 2022 midterms. DeSantis got a 78% favorability rating among Republicans, and he scored 59% very favorable. Trump only got a 76%, but his very favorable was 10 points lower among Republicans at 48%. Most importantly, DeSantis got a 54% among all voters, and Trump only got a 47%. But here's the key. DeSantis never beat Trump in any of our GOP primary matchups. Now, admittedly, we didn't do another one until February 2023, but when we did, Trump still led DeSantis by 13 points among Republican voters. That was DeSantis' high point, however, and most notably, it was before he declared his presidency. Once he did, his numbers went through a 3-month collapse, bringing him down to 17% among Republicans to Trump's 62%. So from trailing by 13 points to trailing by 45 points in just 3 months. His favorability collapsed rapidly as well, with his Republican very favorable rating dropping into the 30s that month, 20 points less than Trump's. Now, there are a lot of reasons DeSantis may have had such a bad collapse. His campaign wasn't apparently run very well. His announcement left a lot to be desired for sure. But I personally think the biggest reason is that Trump just decided to get his head back in the game. Once he showed up at the site of the train wreck in Ohio, people realized that he was back and ready for action. Now, DeSantis kept spending a ton of money for the remainder of 2023, but he should have known it was over. And our polling showed this, with Trump keeping at least a 45-point lead among Republicans. But why shouldn't Ron DeSantis have gotten into the race in the first place? Now, it's one thing to project that Trump might have been taken out by all the legal challenges, but it seemed to me the core of his campaign was always Diet Trump, or all of the platform without all of the mean tweets. Or, said another way, establishment Republicans thought it was time to move on from Trump. And that was never going to be the case with Republican voters. From December 2020, the height of the rush for Trump's election challenges, when the media was mocking him for being an election denier, 72% of Republicans said that as the Republican Party reorganizes itself in the next year, it should be more like Trump. And only 24% of them said it should be more like the average member of Congress. But look at this poll. In February of 2021, 1 month after the Capitol riot that was the biggest threat to our democracy ever, voters were split on whether Trump is the leader the Republican Party needs or whether Republicans need to get away from the legacy of Donald Trump. But Republicans, by a 73% to 24% margin, supported Trump as the leader the Republican Party needed. We asked a lot of questions that supported this theme, but here in this one, November 2022, in the same poll that showed that DeSantis was up over Trump in Republican favorability, 78% of Republicans agreed that the Republican Party is still the party of Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement. In fact, all voters also agreed, 72%, 39% of them strongly. So all along the way, people fundamentally told us that they thought this was Donald Trump's race to run, all the way from 2021 to 2024. They were telling us that the party was not through with Donald Trump, and imagine how much time and money could have been saved if people had only listened. But what's my theory about why people aren't done with Trump? Take DeSantis for an example. He seems to have it all. He's young, he's got a platform that looks pretty similar to Trump's, he isn't under multiple criminal indictments, and he's even taken some pretty strong stances, aggressively fighting for his values. So now people could say charisma or other stuff, but what's the biggest difference on paper? To me, it's the things that he was not saying. And here's just a short list of the things he wasn't saying. And if you'd like, you can go to RasmussenReports.com and become a paid reader or platinum subscriber. Then you can see all the underlying stories and the polling crosstabs for yourself. But here we go. A majority of voters, and about 3/4 of Republicans, think that it's likely that cheating affected the outcome of the 2020 election. Half of voters, and 65% of Republicans, think that undercover federal agents helped provoke the Capitol riot. 53% of voters and 69% of Republicans think that the COVID vaccines have caused a significant number of unexplained deaths. And coming tomorrow, 57% of voters and 79% of Republicans think that it's likely that Joe Biden personally profited from his son's deals with companies in China. 58% of voters and 78% of Republicans think that Joe Biden's Department of Justice is a hypocritical organization selectively persecuting political opponents, just like in a banana republic. And finally, 58% of voters and 3/4 of Republicans think that Biden is systematically working to undermine America's border security. So to me, if you want to challenge Donald Trump, it isn't just enough to say on your website that you're tough on border security. Republican voters think that the 2020 election was stolen from them, and they think that their government is being weaponized against them. They want their leaders to acknowledge those facts and act like they believe it. And if you don't, you're going to get public opinion numbers that look like Mitch McConnell's. Now, I couldn't not include these numbers. Mitch McConnell has perennially been the lowest scoring Republican public official that we ever test, even below Mitt Romney after he voted to impeach Trump. Now, I know he resigned, but these numbers are before then, and they're important because he hit a new milestone. He got an 18% favorable rating among all voters, by far the lowest of all congressional leaders, and only 4% had a very favorable opinion of him. That's 10 points less than Schumer, by the way. But here are the Republican numbers. 5% of Republicans have a very favorable opinion of Mitch McConnell, and he's viewed favorably by only 23% total. For comparison, among Republicans, Chuck Schumer has a 15% total, with 4% of Republicans having a very favorable impression of him. That's only 1 point less than Mitch McConnell. So here's the important lesson and takeaway. Deprioritize critical issues like border security, and Republican voters are going to take notice. It isn't just enough to say the right things. If you get in the way of Republican voters, you're going to get run over, like Mitch McConnell. Thanks for watching to this point. Sign up for a free daily update of all our polling at rasmussenreports.com. Please follow us on Twitter, like the video on YouTube or Rumble. Please subscribe too if you haven't. It's really easy. All you have to do is click a button. And thanks for watching.